Morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be tuning in from your little corner of the world. Thank you so much for joining us here at GMAT Club's MBA Spotlight. My name is Maria Wich-Vila. I'm a graduate of HBS, and I'm the founder of ApplicantLab.com, a social enterprise that is leveling the playing field in MBA admissions. And it is my distinct honor to be introducing here Allison from the Stanford Admissions Office. She has been working there for many, many years, and so I'm sure she has a ton of insights that we are super excited to hear from her. So without further ado, because I know we've got a packed schedule, Allison, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name again is Allison Davis with the Stanford MBA Admissions Office. So how we're going to spend our next 50 minutes is I'm going to very quickly take us through a quick 15-minute overview of the MBA program experience and the admissions process. And then I have two second years, Nell and Pablo, who will come on in 15 minutes and share their experiences with you. And the rest of the time, we're going to do entirely Q&A, so we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. I also have a colleague, Joanna, who will be answering your questions via YouTube. So before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that these times are crying out for leadership more than ever. I think we would all agree the events of the last 9 or 10 months really are crying out for leaders who can address unprecedented circumstances like this global pandemic and the uncertain future that it's bringing. So if you're here today and you're considering going to a graduate business program, of course, that's a big decision. And I imagine these are some of the questions you're probably asking yourselves. What do I really want to do? Will a degree from Stanford get me there? And of course, can I get in? And you know, those questions really go back to an even more fundamental question of what do I want to be when I grow up? So you know that feeling that we all had when we were little kids, that feeling of I could do anything. You know, you haven't failed at anything yet. No one has told you that there's any limitations on you. So if you were to put yourself back in that 7-year-old mindset and ask yourselves, what is it that you really, really want to do with your life and your future? What would that be? Now, of course, that answer is going to be completely different for each one of us, but I imagine a common theme is that you want to have a life that has meaning and a career that has impact. At Stanford, we encourage you to dream big. Our motto, change lives, change organizations, and change the world. That change lives part is really about your own life and the experiences and changes that you will undergo at Stanford. And that's really the first step in your journey. So we prepare you for that journey in 4 distinct ways, shaping how you dream and create, helping you develop your ability to influence other people more effectively, helping you define your sense of your place in the world, and finally, introducing you to a global community that will be part of your lifelong network. So in terms of dreaming and innovating, our location at Stanford and our proximity to Silicon Valley really provides an ideal location for design thinking, for creating solutions for problems in new and creative ways. At Stanford, you can take classes across the entire university. So you could be working on problems jointly with future artists, engineers, and doctors. Our program is also flexible enough that you could even do a second degree while you're at Stanford, and about 1 out of 5 of our students pursue a second degree. So, you know, working with people who have a different perspective than you really allows you to confront assumptions that you have and really allows you to look at things in a new way. And that's honestly the secret sauce to innovation. Secondly, you will develop more effectively your ability to influence other people. At Stanford, we have a personal leadership development curriculum, and the premise of that is for each student to answer for themselves, why would someone follow me? Why would someone follow me? And so, of course, that means we're going to be introducing you to different kinds of frameworks and theories of leadership. But it's not like we say, you know, here's 3 leadership styles, just pick one of these. It's really about digging deep into yourself, your own personality, your own communication skills, and understanding how you come across to people. And then in a safe environment, being able to try on different styles and get some pretty candid feedback. At Stanford, you will, in your very first quarter, be taking leadership labs where you work on those soft skills. You know, how do you have difficult conversations? How do you motivate people? And then that culminates in an all-day simulation where you're put into, every single student is put into a boardroom situation with alumni, and you actually put those skills into practice and get feedback from alumni from all over the world. In electives like interpersonal dynamics, you can further hone those leadership skills. And a lot of the leadership courses are really understanding how you impact other people. And understanding that can really help you develop a skill set that will be very powerful in motivating and leading other people. Third, certainly your sense of your place in the world, I think for all of us is changing because of this global pandemic. You know, what does it mean to be global? What does it mean to be a global leader? And you will have an opportunity to examine that for yourself, your place in in the world through the required global experience requirement and our many global courses. Fourth, you will be joining a lifelong community at Stanford. Your classmates, about 420 of them, come from all over the world, and they will form not only your friendships, lifelong friendships, but they are going to be your future business partners and investors and clients. So this is the cornerstone here on the GSB campus, and it has the motto, dedicated to the things that haven't happened yet and the people who are about to dream them up. I think that really captures a Stanford spirit. Stanford tends to attract people who see the possibilities in things. We hope you're one of those people. Certainly, if you come to Stanford, it's going to change you like no other experience you've ever had. As I mentioned, you're going to become a more global thinker, more innovative thinker. You'll certainly become more confident and effective in your leadership skills, and you will be joining a lifelong community that is going to challenge you and inspire you throughout your lives. So you may be thinking, that sounds pretty interesting. Now, is Allison going to tell me, you know, the secret to how to get into Stanford? I'm not going to tell you the secret because, frankly, there is no secret. There's no secret way to get into Stanford, and you don't need any kind of secret way. It's not necessary. I hope that I've conveyed that the 2-year experience here is really about growth, professional and personal growth and insight. And that actually starts with the application process. So in the application, we're really inviting you to help us get to know you and help us understand how an education at Stanford will help you get to wherever you want to go. So these are the admission criteria here: intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, and personal qualities and contributions. Intellectual vitality, of course, is important to us because we are an academic institution. Demonstrated leadership potential is important to us because we hope that we are educating future senior level people who are going to be leading organizations. And finally, personal qualities and contributions. All that means is what you bring to the class in terms of your perspective. A lot of the learning here is going to be from each other, inside of class, outside of class. So we are looking for people who bring different perspectives, but there's no formula for that. Could be a personal experience you've had. It could be a professional experience you've had. Could even be a failure that you've experienced that could contribute to class discussion. So more concretely, where do we look for evidence of those three criteria? Obviously, academic record. You don't have to have majored in any particular subject to come to Stanford. We do not have any minimum GPA that you need to get into Stanford. We do require either the GMAT or the GRE. And again, we have no minimum cutoff for those tests. We have no preference for one test over the other, so take whichever one makes the most sense for you. We do require English proficiency exam if you were educated outside the United States, and those, unlike the GMAT or the GRE, do have a hard minimum, which are listed here on this slide. Obviously, you need to be fluent in English before you get to Stanford. Now, this requirement is waived. You do not have to take these English proficiency tests if the university that you went to for either undergraduate or graduate degree had instruction that was entirely in English. So no matter what country your university is in, if the language of instruction was 100% English, you do not have to take those English proficiency exams. We do look at extracurricular activities if you have them, and work experience if you have them, in terms of assessing this demonstrated leadership potential, but neither is required. We do not look for any particular kind of work experience. If you do have work experience, as you can imagine, the richness of the learning environment here is that people come from vastly different kinds of industries, career stages, and functional areas. You do not have to have any kind of business experience. We have many non-traditional students in the class. We've had farmers in the class. We've had social workers. We've had physicians. We've had professional ballerinas in the class. So you are not at all limited by your background. We do ask for 2 letters of reference. One should be from a current direct supervisor. If you do not have work experience, you could get one from a summer job or part-time job or an internship. And the other one should also become from a professional source. The most important thing with these recommendations is to choose someone who really knows you well and can give specific examples about you. So if we get a reference that says, this person was the greatest person hired in the last 5 years, and that's all the reference says, that really doesn't help us. We need to know what made you such a great hire. So you do want to choose someone who can give those specific examples and anecdotes. We ask for 2 essays. And I know for many of our international applicants, the idea of doing essays can seem a little strange and a requirement for getting into a graduate program. But we're forming not only a class of students, we are forming a community. And so we do care about who you are beyond your, GPA and your, your salary. So our questions are pretty deep. We ask what matters most to you and why is one question, and the other question is why Stanford. There's also the opportunity to answer some short answer questions where you can talk about impact you've had in various arenas of your life. We do have interviews as part of the process, and those occur after you've applied. We interview about 2 or 3 people for every spot in the class. So we don't have the capacity to interview everybody. And the interviews are almost always conducted by our alumni from all over the world. And of course, right now the interviews are virtual, but they will be with alumni. And the style of interview is a behavioral-based interview. So I've spent a lot of time talking about what we evaluate in your application, but one thing we do not evaluate when we're considering you for admission is your financial resources. So we don't know, we don't want to know, we don't care about what your financial resources are. Our financial aid is guided by these 3 principles: access, excellence, and equity. And the financial aid process occurs after you've been admitted. So once you've been admitted, you start working with our financial aid office. Our financial aid is awarded based on need. So we don't have merit scholarships of any kind. And financial aid is available to everyone, regardless of your citizenship status. The average fellowship, which is free money scholarship that students get, was about $40,000 last year. That's an average. So some people get more, some people get less. And then whatever part of your need is not satisfied by the scholarship will be made up by loans. And again, we have loans for all students, foreign nationals, permanent residents, and US citizens. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this section and bring on Nell and Pablo. So let me stop sharing my screen. Great. Okay. Pablo and Nell, I'm just going to start out with asking you to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about your background, perhaps what you were doing before Stanford and what you're considering doing in the future, and then we'll go to Q&A. So do you want to start us out, Nell?
Sure. My name is Nell. I was previously working in consulting for 2 years prior to the GSB, and then another 4 years working in corporate strategy at Ross Dress for Less, which is a national off-price retail chain based in the US. I'm looking to stay within retail going forward, considering a startup, maybe in the personal care space, but a little bit still to be determined this year.
Great. I'm Pablo, originally from Mexico. I started working in consulting also the first 2 years, and then took a job offer in Australia and Sydney in corporate strategy for a retailer, actually. Same as now, so similar backgrounds there. For 2 years in Sydney, which was awesome, and maybe some Australians in the audience. And then I did a short stint at a startup in Africa, in Kenya, social enterprise, early stage. And I'm at the GSB now, and I'm looking to start up in Latin America. So some venture in the social commerce space where I worked this past summer.
Great. Okay, great. Well, thank you guys. So now we've reached the Q&A portion of the session. Allison, I know that you really wanted Nell and Pablo to speak about their experience. So I'm going to start with a few of those. Nell and Pablo, what would you say is so far the most impactful? We hear all the time that Stanford, the leadership thing and the T groups, and you're going to be so impacted, you're going to be so changed. But for you personally, what has been the biggest impactful change for you? Nell, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think for me, the reason I came to the GSB was actually for that interpersonal growth and that leadership growth. I wasn't looking to pivot industry, so I sort of came to Stanford knowing that was the focus. I think the most impactful thing was my leadership labs experience, and where you're with your squad of MBA1's, and the main focus of the entire quarter's worth of curriculum is giving and receiving feedback and taking away from that class, why would someone follow me as a leader, and really having that intuition and that gut to say what makes me attractive as a leader. And I think that I got some harsh feedback around things that I might not have necessarily been aware of, but the people that gave me that feedback are some of the closest people now in my life at the GSB. So I think the realization that you can sort of give very constructive direct feedback, that because someone wants to give it to you because they know that it will make you better. And that's kind of like the goal that they have for you. So I think that was one of the most impactful things for my first year.
Has that impacted how you give feedback now?
Yes, I learned that I sandwich feedback. So I would, if I wanted to give someone constructive feedback, I would say something positive, something constructive, and then something positive. I got feedback that sort of was not an effective way to give someone constructive feedback, and it was more impactful to give it directly and sort of share why I was saying it. So it absolutely changed the way I give feedback.
Cool. Pablo, what's been the biggest transformation for you so far?
Yeah, no, it's been a similar thing to Nell, actually. I also came here for leadership development aspect to the Stanford MBA, which I think is something that distinguishes this program. But also like lead labs, as you were saying, Maria, it's seeing how others see you and bridging the gap, between how you see yourself and how other people perceive you, and just seeing that gap, which may be wider for some people than others, is a very powerful thing. So that was very, very powerful for me. And given my experience in that class, I opted to get into the fellows program, which is sort of the next step after that course, where you become a coach and a mentor for MBA1's, and you keep developing those feedback, giving and receiving skills and that self-awareness.
Oh, that's great. The Arbuckle Fellows program is what I believe you are referring to. Excellent. Okay, so you've both mentioned leadership labs, which is, of course, what Stanford is famous for. Outside of the leadership classes, are there any others that have been, that you've particularly enjoyed?
I last year took Freedom, Democracy, and Capitalism with Professor Hennessy, and it's a civics class around kind of all things that you would think would be in there based on the title. And it was an absolutely fascinating class. It brings together a pretty wide range of political views that are represented at the GSB because of the professor and because of the topic. And it kind of the class sort of was concurrent with as COVID was starting to pick up in the winter and in the spring. And it just became a fascinating discussion around, how we as leaders should be responding to the current climate of uncertainty. And it was fascinating. I learned so much in that class, and it was challenging. Like, you had to write a very succinct memo every single week where you shared a pretty strong viewpoint in, I think, less than 400 words. And it was harshly graded, but for the best, because I think I took away from that class just succinctly making points and stating an argument and backing it up with facts.
Cool, very topical. Pablo, how about you?
Yeah, for me, one of the highlights of my classes was Lean Launchpad, which is an experiential entrepreneurship class in the winter quarter of this year, and it's taught by several VCs, so venture capitalists, and Steve Blank, who's the father of the Lean Startup approach. And so you apply with a team. In my case, other Hispanics or folks interested in Hispanic Americans, and we're trying to find a solution for a fintech solution for underserved Hispanics in the US, of which there are like 60 million. And so it's a very intense class, about 15 to 20 hours per week. And it's experiential. So you go out and interview customers, potential customers, build a prototype and start iterating on that as you go. So it's very intensive.
Everyone who studied entrepreneurship at the MBA level knows Steve Blank, and at Stanford, only at Stanford can you have him as your professor. So that's pretty extraordinary. Okay, my next question for you guys is obviously COVID has impacted your experience. So if I ask how has COVID impacted, I know it's going to be, perhaps you had virtual types of experiences, but can you speak more specifically to how have Stanford students stepped up to the challenge of the COVID times that we live in?
Pablo, do you want to go first?
Are you guys still like socialize? Are you doing like virtual happy hours, or how is something like tea groups or leadership labs going to work?
Yeah, I would say my feeling was that my relationships have actually gotten stronger in this period than they might have otherwise if COVID hadn't happened, because the nature of your interactions are now one-on-one, either virtual or one-on-one going on a socially distant walk, or one-on-one, having coffee from a distance. So I feel like I've developed deeper and stronger relationships with my classmates. I think that's different than what might have otherwise happened at the end of our first year had we not gone virtual, when I think the idea of spring quarter is that you suddenly meet a lot of people in classes that weren't in your section and that you have a broader kind of exposure to. But I think that I've seen my classmates really step up to the plate on kind of like leaning into developing those deeper relationships. And then I think on top of that, so many of our classmates have also kind of gone and started entrepreneurial ideas related to COVID response. And so you've just seen sort of Stanford really trying to figure out how we can be leaders in this moment. And several members of our Pablo and my class have kind of started things, giving back to the community and ideas about how we can make the COVID response a little bit better in the area. So I think that's one thing that I've seen, and it's been pretty really impressive to see. And then I think also the Stanford faculty has worked tirelessly this summer. It's really clear in the elective classes to make them kind of very meaningful online experiences. And in some cases, we're able to have sort of outdoor interactions. Like my class went outdoors last week, and we all wore masks and sat 6 feet apart under a tent, but we're able to have some sort of in-person interaction. And the fact that we were able to do that just is showing how innovative they've tried to be in response to this, the times.
Great. Pablo, do you have anything to add or similar experience?
No, I would echo a lot of that. And to your specific questions, Maria, I mean, T groups are actually hybrid. So folks are meeting in person, just 6 feet apart, and with masks, see-through masks. And Lead Labs is happening also hybrid. I lead a squad, and so I mean, we meet outdoors some weeks when we can, and so it's hybrid. But just, I mean, I would just say, of course it is disappointing when classes go online. I mean, it's not the ideal scenario, but I think Stanford has managed pretty well. And also, by the way, it's like, this is a very transformational time to be, studying management and leadership. I mean, it's a very pivotal time for the world, for the country. And so to be here with access to these professors and these classmates and really, absorbing all that knowledge live is actually a very, very unique opportunity. So I appreciate that.
That's wonderful. As I'm sure you guys know, a lot of incoming first years at all business schools decided to defer because they were concerned about the perceived lower quality of the experience. But it's my position that business schools are doing a great job trying their best to really replicate it and really replicate not only the academic experience, but also the social experience. So I'm glad to hear that Stanford has been doing that well as well. I am going to start throwing in a couple of questions now for Allison, because as I'm sure you can imagine, a lot of people really want to hear from Allison because they're going to tear apart every word you say, Allison, to try to figure out how they can get in. So let's put up, so Allison, this is, have you seen an increase in round one apps given everything that's going on in the world right now?
Yeah, we actually don't report our applications round by round, so we will be reporting them at the end of the year. And I guess I would just comment in terms of how many applications and your comment about people trying to figure out how they can get in. My advice to you is you're going to drive yourself crazy if all you think about is how many people applied, how many have backgrounds similar to mine. I would throw that whole perspective away. Really focus on yourself, telling your own story, and just put blinders on, because there's no point trying to worry about stuff that you can't control. What you can control is your own application and your own process. So I would suggest you
can't tell me like an increase, like up, down, no. You're nothing. I'm getting nothing. Okay. Okay.
No, we don't
can't blame me for trying. Okay. So the next question, your very famous motto, change lives, change organizations, change the world. How does that impact when you're assessing applications? How does that impact who you select versus who may not get accepted?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the framework we're looking at is how people want to have a career that has impact. But what that impact is could be anything. I mean, it could be like Pablo talked about, trying to change circumstances for a certain underserved population, but it could also be coming up with the next perfect financial instrument, or the next perfect, clean energy technology or something. So we're agnostic as far as what that impact would be, but we want to see people who do want to have impact in some way.
So how do you assess previous impact as a sort of tea leaf that you can read to try to guess who's going to be the most impactful?
Yeah, good question. We definitely believe that past experiences forecast future behavior. So we are looking at what you've done in the past. I mentioned the demonstrated leadership potential. So we're going to look at impact you've had, in your personal life, or it could be in your professional life. You may have no work experience at all, but you were responsible for, raising, your 2 younger siblings or something. So you had huge impact in these individual lives. So we're not looking for any particular, it could be in any realm of your life. And then also our interviews, I was trying to get through the 15 minutes. So let me add here that our interviews, I mentioned that they're behavioral based, competency based, and that means that the interviewer is going to be asking you not so much what you did, but how you did it. and they're looking for patterns of behavior that you've shown in the past that may reflect certain competencies.
Okay. So you brought up younger candidates, so I'm going to skip to this question. Obviously every school says we accept people for all kinds of experience. So you have 0 years or 100 years, we don't care. But when younger applicants tend to get in, what are the sorts of attributes or you mentioned someone perhaps raising younger siblings. Can you give us a few more examples of how a younger career applicant can look at their own candidacy and say, am I ready or am I not ready?
Sure. I would say it's impact that you've had in your environment. So when we get people, and we do get people who apply straight out of college or graduate programs and really have no full-time work experience, typically we're going to see impact that they've had in extracurriculars. We have had students who've not only started, organizations at their campuses, but have franchised them across, other universities. So again, the scope of the impact is really impressive, for someone who's still an undergraduate.
All right. So here's a question that I think, we get a lot, just in the world of admissions in general. It sounds to me like I think both Nell and Pablo had worked in consulting prior. Presumably they did well in those careers, and so when you're evaluating people at the big brand name types of jobs or the typical feeder jobs like consulting or banking or what have you, how do you assess those people versus people who might have been at a very small startup? And is there one profile over another that has an advantage in admissions?
Well, definitely neither has an advantage. Again, we're trying to construct a class that has a variety of perspectives. So if you go on our class profile on our website, you'll see that our students in a class of like 420 come from, I think, over 300 different organizations. So, there's a lot of heterogeneity there. In terms of big companies versus small companies or feeders, we certainly hear from, the consultants where they say, well, how can I distinguish myself from the gazillion other consultants that you get? And I'm sure, this is true of all business schools. But again, we're admitting more than your job description. We're admitting you as a person and your aspirations and your values and your extracurriculars and interests. And frankly, that's also why the essays are important. We get more of a sense of your voice through the essays. With smaller companies, you may get more responsibility faster. But on the other hand, in the big companies, that's a different kind of challenge in terms of how you can show impact in a big company and make a difference. So I think they each work environment has its own set of challenges where you can have impact and where you can stand out. So I guess what I'm saying is we look at each candidate individually and holistically.
That's great. And the Stanford application, now with your, last year you added these 3 extra optional questions where people can really discuss briefly their sort of 3 major leadership impacts. I think no other business school really gives you the opportunities to really demonstrate that impact than you guys. So I love that. And I'm using that as a segue. For those of you who may not be familiar yet with the Stanford Business School application, for years, their signature question has been, what matters most to you and why? And so I think this is, you urge people at the beginning not to overthink things, but I can assure you that they do. And so if you could please give a few, without obviously divulging anything confidential, but can you give us a few examples of, because one of the things I tell people is that it's not so much the what, like don't spend 3 weeks obsessing over how are you going to talk about what matters most? Like, should I say it's family or should I say it's friends who are like family? Or should I say it's being friends with my family? And I'm like, just don't worry about that part. So it's more about the substance behind it. But so can you just give some examples of some of your favorite ones or the wide scope that you've seen over the years?
Sure. And yeah, you gave a perfect example of how an applicant can drive themselves crazy over, something that isn't important. I would also say you want to make sure to answer the why. So it's what matters most to you and why. And honest to God, the topic, we're not sitting in judgment of the topic. So some people do write about personal things. They might write about family or friends. Some people write about an idea or a value that is most important to them. Some people write about situations in their professional lives. I gave the example of somebody having, some horrible business failure, but it was pivotal to them in terms of what they learned about themselves. The topic honestly doesn't matter. My best advice to you is, I'm sure Pablo and Nell will testify that you want to spend a lot of time thinking before you hit the keyboard, that this is a pretty profound question. So it could be personal, spiritual, professional, the topic doesn't matter to us, but be sure to be honest about it. Don't try to guess like what we want to hear. The examples you gave, you really want to focus on honestly what's most important to you. And many of our students and alums say that actually the process of writing that essay, even if they don't get into Stanford, has been a useful, experience of self-reflection. And that's how I'd approach it.
Yeah, I tell people that admissions officers have really strong BS detectors. So don't try it because you won't get away with it. I was wondering, Nell and Pablo, because I want to ask you guys a question. Do you guys ever, as students, do you guys ever share with each other, like, oh, here's what I wrote and what matters most? Like, does that ever come into the classroom experience, either formally or informally, or is it just like it's in the past and we don't ever talk about it? I'm just curious, Nell.
For me, it came up with my squad last year. We did an AMA, which is Ask Me Anything, as we were starting to get to know each other last year. And one of the common questions we would ask each other in the AMA is what matters most to you and why. And people would kind of give a brief summary of it, it's fun because at that point, everyone's there. And it sort of was a good demonstration of what Allison was talking about, that there really is no answer that gets you into the GSB, right? Everyone's answers were so completely different and varied and demonstrated who they are. And so that was interesting. And then in recent times, my some friends and I have a house, my roommates and I have a house meeting every Monday where we kind of do different activities. And one of them is one person a week has to read their essay just to kind of get to know each other a little bit better, which has been fun. We instituted it a couple of weeks ago.
That's great. And would you guys agree with Allison that the process of thinking through the What Matters Most essay itself was particularly valuable? I'm guessing that's, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I would agree with that 100%. I mean, it's about self-awareness, self-understanding, I would say. It's coming up with either a value or a story or a series of stories that you can abstract to a sort of pattern. And so it's about thinking about pivotal moments or instances or events in your life and how they change and how they influence the way you think and behave now. And so being aware of that can really shape the way you carry yourself going forward. And so it's very enlightening. It was very enlightening for me, for sure.
And also, sorry. I was going to add that this is actually my second attempt at being in business school, and I was a reapplicant. So I can completely attest to what Allison was describing, that I did not put enough self-reflection and introspection into my first set of business school applications across schools. And I don't know that the essay was definitively the reason, this time that I got in, but I did so much more introspection in that second cycle of business school applications. And to me, that was a differentiating factor. And the results was just how much reflection and it was so genuine, the process of going through and writing those essays. So I completely echo what she was describing.
I just wanted to add, especially for our international applicants who are, again, like, why is Stanford making me write these crazy essays? And a question like that, are they trying to torture me? I just want to remind people that actually part of leadership is knowing yourself. and really being able to honestly assess your strengths and your weaknesses. In terms of putting together your executive team, you want to have people who complement your own development areas. And so there actually is a reason that we are interested in the characteristic of self-insight.
Yeah, and to Pablo's earlier point, I tend to tell people that if you're totally stuck on this essay, which most people are when they first encounter it, think of those crucible moments, like where you had to make a really hard decision and what pulled you one way or the other. So I did not apply to GSB, but if I would have, I might have been tempted at first to say, family is what matters most to me, but that's not true, because one big crucible moment in my life was I was offered a job in Hong Kong, and I accepted it like this. And later that night, I called my mom, and she started crying. And she was like, "How dare you abandon me? You're moving to the other side of the planet, And so I'm like, oh my God, when the rubber hits the road, when those big decision points happen, my family did not matter most to me. Sorry, I chose that adventure in Hong Kong without even. I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't even think about my mom crying. Like that didn't even occur to me. So I would urge people listening, like, try to really think about when those big moments happen, what guides those values or those choices that you make. Let me see. We have so many questions here about percentages of people accepted in round one and stuff. I think I want to ask, since we have Nell and Pablo here, what are some examples of some of your classmates that have just really stood out to you in terms of things that they've done beforehand? Maybe it could be entrepreneurial, it could be something in the social enterprise sector. You guys are both incredibly accomplished, but in terms of your classmates, what are some of the more inspirational people? Everyone at Stanford's inspirational, but who are some of the more inspirational people that stand out for you that you could share?
There's so many.
Okay. Oh no.
I guess one thing that stands out is the modesty of classmates' accomplishments. And so, like, two examples that kind of jump to mind. The first year, there was an anecdote of someone chatting with one of our classmates and saying, "Oh, are you a swimmer? I'm a swimmer too. Like, would love to go swim some laps with you in the morning." And it turned out one of our classmates was, Olympic medalist in swimming, and she just casually was suggesting that she did it as a hobby. And another was two classmates talking about loving to bake and wanting to, bake one night together in the GSB residences. And it turns out one of the classmates is a Michelin-starred pastry chef. So it's like people have done so much. And obviously everyone is impressive, but the amount of modesty and kind of being humble about your accomplishments here never ceases to amaze me pretty much daily.
That's great. Pablo, do you have any?
Yeah, no, I would totally. It's a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives, right? And Olympians, Navy SEALs, and very accomplished military people, entrepreneurs, people that sold companies abroad and then are coming to the GSB to pivot, entertainment folks, influencers, literally people that have 10 million followers on Instagram because they're artists and they're famous in their home country, and just pretty much everything. Also, religious diversity and cultural diversity. And so it's so many nationalities also. And so you get into a classroom, and as Allison was saying, a lot of the learning comes from other classmates. And so you discuss a case, just listen to the diversity of perspectives and points of view around the same topic, and it's just very enlightening. It really opens your mind a lot.
Yeah, and what I liked especially about Nell's answer is that you really demonstrate that there is a diverse, when admissions officers say like, "Oh, we accept a diverse people," it's really a holistic process. I mean, you've got an Olympic swimmer and a Michelin-starred pastry chef. Like, that's pretty good evidence. What more evidence do you need that really people from all backgrounds do have a chance of getting accepted? So I think we've got time. We only have a few more minutes left, but I think my final question again to Nell and to Pablo is going to be, what advice would you give to incoming students? How should people, if they're going to Stanford, what should they do in advance, if anything, to prepare the most for the experience, to get the most out of it?
Pablo, do you want to start us off?
Sure. What I would say is it's, when you first get here, it feels like drinking from a fire hose, or that's what they call it. And you want to be involved in everything. My advice would be just be clear on what your values are, what matters to you actually, what's important to you, and just stick with that. Be yourself. Don't be carried away by the herd or what everyone else is doing. Just do what feels right for you, and you'll be fine.
I definitely echo that. I think on top of it, I'd say be selfish in your time before you get here, because it's shocking how little of it you feel like you have when you get here. And if that means being selfish because you want to spend more time with your family or more phone calls with your family because you recognize that in the first few months you might not have that ability, or you want to spend time with friends, or you want to read a book, just, I would say, spend some time to really be clear on what matters to you before you get here, because to Pablo's point, it can get a little bit lost in the shuffle in your first few months, and it takes a little while to pick your head up and realize that you haven't necessarily been spending your time the way you might want to. So I would say just be really intentional before you get here on knowing why you're doing this, and knowing what you want to get out of it, and sort of spending your time in advance on fueling yourself for the particularly challenging but amazing few months that will be in store for you when you arrive.
All right, excellent. So, we actually have 2 minutes left. So real quick, just so that way people don't say, oh, you told me I would get 50 minutes with Stanford and I only got 48. Let's just do round robin from Allison, Nell, and Pablo. Like, what final piece of advice would you give to people who are thinking about, is Stanford for me, or how can I get in, or maybe how about, is Stanford for me? There's a ton of business schools out there. What is it that would make someone say, okay, this is the one I want to go to? And we'll go around.
I guess I would just remind people that there are hundreds of wonderful business schools all over the world where you can get a quality education. So I would not focus on one school as, the only school for you. If you're looking smaller schools, there's Stanford, there's Tuck, there's Berkeley. If you're looking at general management programs, there's Harvard, there's Stanford. So I think you want to spend some time looking at what's the right program for you, and doing your research, and not being, just following the crowd.
Excellent. Nell, what would you say?
I would just say, think about your goals. Why are you going to business school? Is it pivoting career? Is it because you're looking for leadership skills? And be clear on what you want out of it, because I think different schools are amazing at different things. And so that will help kind of inform you. And then I'd say, understand the teaching pedagogy that's happening at each school, the class size, like those things impact your day-to-day life much more than I think people might give credit to. So really be thoughtful about what matters to you in terms of the teaching style and the learning style.
Absolutely. I agree completely. Pablo, how about you?
And to Nell's point, also the flexibility with the curriculum. Some schools are totally flexible, some are pretty rigid, and so that also matters. But to me, at Stanford, it's just leadership development and self-awareness development. That's really, in my opinion, what embodies the GSB.
And that will serve all of you well, wherever you may go in your lives and careers. Okay, well, thank you so much, Allison, Nell, and Pablo, for joining us here today. I'm sure everyone really appreciated getting your perspectives. And as for the rest of you who might be watching, join us in 10 minutes when our next session begins. Thank you so much.
Thanks.